I was having a debate with someone online, which of course is a very productive way to spend your time, but we were debating whether or not a hip thrust is an isolation or a compound exercise. Now, ultimately it's going to depend on your definition. Traditionally, isolation is viewed as one joint has significant movement. A compound exercise is where two or more joints have significant movement. I personally have always thought of an isolation exercise as a hip thrust as an isolation exercise, but I was interested to note several people thought that it was compound. And if you want to argue that there's so much going on at the LPHC that maybe it should be compound there, honestly, I wouldn't even disagree with that. There's a lot going on there, it depends how you define it. But what I was really surprised was they were arguing that there's a lot of movement, really noticeable movement at the ankle and at the knee, and that's contributing significantly to muscular stimulation, muscular development, and that just didn't kind of jive with me. So I just wanted to put that to the test. Now before I move forward, I want to mention that whether you view the hip thrust as an isolation or compound exercise, that doesn't mean that it's either effective or not. Personally, I think the hip thrust can be really good at developing size, strength, shape of the glutes. I know Brett C is a huge fan of it, and I'm a big fan of him. I've got a tremendous amount of respect for what he's done. So this is definitely not a knock on the hip thrust. This is simply just a way of looking at why it's classified that. And really what I was thinking, if you had a boot on, right, if you injured your foot and you had a boot on, you could easily do a hip thrust. In fact, it'd be one of the best exercises to do with a really injured foot. And then I was thinking, you could probably even do a hip thrust if you had a 90-degree cast on your knee. Obviously, how bad you were injured might affect it, but just your knee being locked, I don't think it would really affect it. And then I was thinking if you had a boot and a cast, you could still probably do a hip thrust. And that's why I'm dressed like this. I'm not trying to be an old lady here, but I've set up a little something to emulate this. So I've got my foot and my knee locked. Okay, this is relatively firm. There's the backing of my kid's desk, which is now dismantled for the purpose of this, held on by a gangster wrap, some little thing, I don't know what that's called, and a kid's belt around my thigh. And so I'm going to show you hip thrust and show you what some of the motions are and maybe what isn't going on. It's a little hard to move like this, so forgive the awkwardness. But with the hip thrust, we want to get in, and again, the key is we have a 90-degree angle here at the knee, a 90-degree angle at the ankle. All right, so we're here, so we're going to drop down, and then we're going to come right back up. Down, right back up. And if you're going to argue, there's I think I saw a 5-degree movement of the board, then fine. Okay, but almost all movements have that. So as you can see, there's really no significant motion at all going on my knee. You might also want to call me, yeah, but your toes, your foot is pivoting up. Again, it's just rolling back and forth. There's zero muscular development there. Again, I could do this with a boot with super firmly locking my foot in. So it's just the momentum of this hip extension, which of course is actually happening, that then is pushing everything forward. And yeah, there might be some stuff on the trunk. Again, that's a little bit more debatable. But to argue that there's real noticeable knee extension here, or that there's real noticeable dorsiflexion, honestly, I'm just not going to agree with that assessment, and I don't think it's really that crucial for that. And in fact, ironically, acknowledging that it's an isolation exercise actually means that it's more effective. I know in general, compound exercises are more effective than isolation exercises, but if you're already using the same weight, if you're doing a hip thrust and you're doing 300 pounds, and we argue that it's compound, and you're using your glutes and your quads and your erectors and your hammies and your tibialis anterior or whatever you want to throw in there, that means all those muscles are lifting that weight. If you argue that it's more isolation, really the glutes are the main thing moving. Of course, there's going to be some hamstrings in there. Very little quads other than that isometric contraction, obviously nothing at the shin or ankle. That means it's really the glutes that are lifting 300 pounds. Therefore, it's more effective for that. So all things being equal, a same weight exercise would be better to be isolation, right? It's usually because it's compound, we can go so much heavier, is one reason why compound usually trumps it. I also think this helps you figure out where to place it. You're not going to do hip thrusts before squats. You're not going to do them before leg press unless you're trying to pre-exhaust or prioritize your glutes. But still a big muscle, so you're going to do them before extensions, before curls. Okay, so probably do them after lunges, step-ups, things like that require a little bit more skill and coordination. So again, hip thrust I think is an excellent exercise, but at least by my definition, it's tough to argue that it's really a compound exercise if you're going to look at the knee and ankle. Those are really pretty much stationary. There may be a little bit of motion in there. It's secondary, non-consequential. Muscle involvement isn't relevant at those joints. And so to me, it's just hip extension, working the glutes.